UNLV Microcertificate Economics. There are three big economic problems that economists are concerned with. First is unemployment, and we talked about that in that last video. The second is how we make the economy grow over time, and we'll talk about that later on in life. The one that we're going to consider in this video, the third of the three, is inflation. Inflation is a sustained increase in the general price level. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple things. One, sustained. So if prices go way up on Friday and Sunday they come back down to where they were, that's not inflation because it wasn't sustained. Gas prices go up for a weekend or go down, it's got to be over a long period of time. So usually we talk about inflations as lasting certainly months, but usually years. Then it's general price level. What that means is that most prices are going to go up. Not all prices. Some prices are going to go down. The price of computers is much lower today than it was 20, 30 years ago. It's not even close. It's in some parts of the business, it's thousands of times lower. So it's not just about all the prices going up, because they don't. It's about most prices going up. And they don't all go up at the same speed. Some prices are going to go up really fast. Medical care goes up much faster than everything else. Medical care has gone up about 3 times faster than everything else in the last 30 years, where clothing prices haven't gone up very much at all. We're going to measure inflation using what's called a price index. It's a simple number that takes out the complexity of saying this is $20 and this is $10. It's a simple number. It says we pick a year, we call that year the base year, we set that year equal to 100. If prices double, we say prices are now 200. Index number, it's a ratio. So whatever's going on with prices, and we'll talk in a second how we get there, it's a number that's just a ratio of prices in one year to prices in another year, and we call that an index number. 3 basic index numbers we use. The consumer price index is the one we hear about the most. That's the one you see on radio and television and on the internet or wherever you get your news, assuming you actually get news. It's what presidents talk about. It affects things like Social Security payments. It's a big deal. The second one is called the Producer Price Index, the PPI. That's an index of things that businesses buy. That's important because it's a predictor of the CPI. So if the PPI is going up, that means businesses are paying more money for things that they're buying, and that means eventually, months down the road probably, they're going to have to pass those price increases that they're paying on to their customers. So it lets us see what's coming. If the PPI is relatively stable, that means that we expect the CPI to be regularly stable. That means that consumers aren't going to pay more. And then lastly, there's a real specialized thing called the deflator, the GDP deflator, and that's used to turn nominal GDP into real GDP. So it's this magic number. We take whatever the GDP number is, 20 trillion, we divide it by this deflator, and that number that we get when we're done with that is the value of real GDP. Okay, so how are we going to come up with this consumer price index? The answer is we're going to create what's called a market basket. The government's going to go out, and the last time they did this in a big way was 1983-ish. They're going to go out and they're going to survey millions of people all across America and find out what they buy over the course of a year. They don't consider lots of folks. It's an urban wage earner index. So people who live in rural areas, low-income people, high-income people, all those people come out. It's middle class, it's supposed to be at least, middle class households that live in cities. Okay? So we figure out what they buy. We make a list called a market basket. Over the course of the year, they buy this many kilowatts of electricity, this many gallons of gas, that many strawberries, this many jars of peanut butter. We add up everything they're going to buy into a basket, and we figure out how much that basket would cost us to buy. So let's say we add up everything in the basket. Now we go out at one store, and it costs us however much. We go all across America. We send people out all across the United States to thousands of stores all across the United States and price jars of peanut butter. And we send them to gas stations all across the United States. And we price gallons of gasoline. And we price electricity. And we price everything that goes into that basket. So we have an average price of an average item in an average basket across America. Now, we do that again. Next month, we're going to go out and do that again. And the month after that, we're going to do that again. We'll come back to changing the basket in a second, but think of it as we keep buying the same things every month. Now, let's suppose that the basket in the base year, in the very beginning month, cost us $3,000. And that the basket next month cost us $3,030 to buy. All we're going to do is take that $3,030, divide it by 3,000. We get 1.01. We multiply that times 100 and get 101. The new index is 101. That means prices went up 1% this month. Simple? Simple. Lots of complications, obviously, but simple. So if the market basket at the beginning was 3,000 and today it's 7,500, we would divide 7,500 over 3,000, get 2.5, multiply that times 100. We have a consumer price index of 250, which means prices today on average are 2.5 times what they were when we started. Okay? So we have a base year of 100, and we have these numbers that build on that base year of 100 as the size of the basket changes. So again, now a reminder about the PPI and the deflator. We're going to do the same thing with the PPI that we do with the CPI. We're going to do this survey and figure out what businesses buy, paper clips and iron ore and whatever else they buy. And we're going to create an index the same way that we would create an index. So if the PPI is 200, that means the prices businesses pay are twice as high as they were. Then I'm going to do the same thing. We're actually not going to do quite the same thing for GDP because GDP includes everything, all final goods and services. So GDP, we're not trying to figure out what the average person buys. We're going to look at everything that's produced and what's happening to the prices of everything. Now, you've been listening to this, you've been saying to yourself, I don't really think that works. And yeah, so highly imperfect, right? So we already talked a little bit just for a second about the fact that it's middle class urban households. So as a college student, the CPI doesn't accurately reflect what you're likely to buy. As a college professor, the CPI probably doesn't accurately reflect what I'm likely to buy. If you're Warren Buffett, or you're living in the poor side of town, or you're living out on a farm somewhere, that CPI really doesn't apply to you, and that's an issue. The biggest issue is probably, though, something we call substitution. The CPI has its basis in 1983, and they do something called chain-weighted, which means they try to update the basket all the time, but that has a problem too. Think about what we bought in 1983. If you were around in 1983, which you probably weren't even around, you would have been listening to music in your car on a cassette tape, and you would have been buying probably vinyl because CDs just came out into the world in 1983. You had a Beta or a VHS tape player in your house to watch movies. you had a landline phone in your house. You didn't have a cell phone. There was no internet. If you had a PC, it was probably an Apple II, and it was good with any color you wanted as long as it was green. The world's changed. And so to say prices are X percent higher than they were, 240 some percent higher than they were in 1983, is not meaningful in the sense that what we buy changes. And to make comparisons back into the distant past is even worse. It's a funky number that's just going to be by its nature imperfect. Related to that also is quality issue. Car tires are way better than they were 20, 30 years ago. They last a lot longer. They're much less likely to break on you. They're just different. We have lots of things that the quality is either better or worse than it was, and we can't include that quality being better or worse in the CPI. It just doesn't reflect those quality changes. And that's another reason that you have to, again, take it with a grain of salt. Now, given that it's a funky index, you would think we wouldn't use it a lot, but in fact, it gets used incredibly. It's used to give people raises at work. It's used to give Social Security recipients wages, and yet we know that most Social Security recipients, for example, are not middle-class working people anymore. They're retirees. And so by definition, the CPI doesn't actually measure the kinds of things that they're buying, and yet we use it to change the numbers for Social Security. So given that, we need to be careful in how we use this index. And when you come to class, we'll show you some more things you might do to reflect on it and to play with it a little bit.